Hello, BookTube. All right, I'm back for more Q&A. This is 7.7K Q&A. This is number 2 today and number 4 total. And we are up to Colin Rafferty. My question is, how do you read for over 8 hours a day practically? Is it just practice? Yes. Yes, it is just practice. And lack of distraction, right? I have the ability to concentrate on my reading to the exclusion of all else. A bomb could go off. And unless I'm in between books, I wouldn't notice. I lost count of how many times I've been reading in public, on a bench, at a station, waiting for someone, in an airport, waiting for someone to arrive. They arrive, they stand there in front of me, then laughing, chuckling, they put down their bags and they sit down next to me in the row of seats and just wait for me to notice that they're there, and it doesn't happen. So yeah, it's just practice. Practice on concentration, practice on losing yourself in a book. Omnipotent Poobah says, number 1, you mentioned the war on cliche in an earlier episode. Following on that, I was wondering who is the book reviewer's book reviewer, and if there's anyone doing literary reviews and criticism at the moment that you always make time to read, not because they're popular, but more because they're just annoyingly good at it. Well, yeah, quite a few people, yes. The book reviewer's book reviewer, as far as I'm concerned, is Virginia Woolf, who is blindingly brilliant at my profession. Just blindingly brilliant at it. Also blindingly brilliant at the stuff that reviewers write about, which is kind of annoying. But because in her nonfiction, her essays, her fiction, her short stuff, but there are plenty of people today that are Adam Mars-Jones, Christian Lorenzen, of course, Sam Sachs, reviewing fiction. Sam Sachs writing on fiction is very much worth your time. He's behind a paywall at the Wall Street Journal. Every once in a while, an extrovert friend of his will manage to convince him to bestir himself to pitch a longer piece to the Atlantic or to Harper's, in which case you don't have to have a paywall. You can just buy the magazine on the stand, but it takes a lot of work. Old people, I tell you, they're such a trial. Number 2, you've made your feelings about the Booker long list and the general direction of travel of book prizes very clear of late. Knowing how much you like hypotheticals, if there was such a thing as a Donoghue Prize for fiction, which half dozen or so novels of the last 12 months would be nominated? There is a Donoghue Prize for fiction. Okay, let's remember that. Let's all remember that, especially since we don't have that long to go before you see it again. At the end of every year, on my book blog, Steve Reads, which is incorporated into Open Letters Review. It's online. It's free to read. At the end of every year, I do a best and worst books of that year. I start with all the secondary categories that nobody but me cares about. Nature, books in translation, debut fiction, history, biography, children's books, YA books, all that sort of stuff. But I end with the best fiction and the best nonfiction and the worst fiction and the worst nonfiction of that year. And my list is completely definitive. I am the only person who makes such a list that reads as widely as I do. I read more books in the category genres that I am judging, so to speak, I read more books in those category genres in the course of a year than do the prize committees or the entire art section, the entire book section of whole newspapers. It's literally all I do. And unlike a lot of those prize judges committees and newspapers who come out with their lists and use namby-pamby language like saying, well, your mileage may vary and all that, from watching this channel, I am willing to stack up. Nothing is more important to me than that my recommendations land with you. I am not on any kind of a box-ticking social justice ego trip at all. I'm recommending things that because they are good, not because I think they should be recommended. I stand by my recommendations at the end of every year. It means a lot to me if someone were to, if they don't have an axe to grind, if they don't just want to be trouble, if somebody with an open mind goes to my best fiction of the year for last year, let's say, picks one of the books, or even the number one book, reads it, and then tells me, I just didn't think it was any good, that's going to bother me a lot. I'm going to want to talk to you. That's going to mean something to me. And it's also very much going to mean something to people, as they have over the decades. People go to those lists, because I've been doing this forever. Those lists are out there. You can find them. Just go to Google and type in Steve Donoghue Best Fiction. And you will get rafts of responses, rafts of them. It also means a huge amount to me when somebody goes to one of those lists and says, boy, I didn't think I would like this, but I saw it on your list and I trust you, so I read it and I loved it. That means everything to me. So there is such a thing as the Steve Donoghue Prize. I'm not quite pretentious enough to call it a prize, but nevertheless, my list at the end of the year is definitive. You're going to see Publishers Weekly, and you're going to see the Washington Post and the New York Times, of course, famously the New York Times. They're all going to come out with their best books of the year list. They all are. You're going to see a million of those. Entertainment Weekly does it, for Pete's sake. There's only one list that matters, and it's mine. So, let's see here. Bob Van Beek says, least bad D.H. Lawrence novel, if there is such a thing. I'm afraid I don't have anything for you. Some of his poetry I like. A lot of his nonfiction I like, but his fiction, I don't like any of it. Steve Fuller says, you mentioned Spider Robinson earlier today, and I was thrilled. I read one of his books many years ago on a tip from a Moorcock and Mieville fan. Since reading that book and loving it, he seems to have disappeared from the shelves. Why? He was wonderful. Yeah, I know. He has disappeared from the shelves. I don't know. I have no idea why science fiction and fantasy is so brutal to its own past. I don't really get that. Genre fiction just in general tends to be, but science fiction, it always strikes me as really egregious. I've said many times on this channel, if you walked into a retail bookstore anywhere in America and walked up and down the science fiction fantasy bookshelves, the things you wouldn't see there are absolutely embarrassing. But if you absolutely can, if you want Spider Robinson and you can't find him anywhere, feel free to send me an email. I might be able to look for him. Let's see here. How are we doing for time? Oh, we're fine. Nathan Fong says, since it's unlikely any of us would be able to travel to Boston anytime soon for wine and calzones, any chance of your moose story to help us get through the isolation? I recently binged on Northern Exposure. There's a moose in Northern Exposure. It comes wandering into the frame in the opening credits of Northern Exposure. And every time I watch the opening credits and see that moose, it makes me want to open a bottle of red wine. What Nathan is referring to, for those of you who are new to the channel, is that I have an epic moose story from my travels that I always say can only be done properly over wine and calzones in person, and I'm afraid that's still true. But boy, oh boy, that Northern Exposure, I'm glad it gets a shout out. What a show. And the final episode, oh my god, the final episode of Northern Exposure, in fact the final 10 minutes of the final episode of Northern Exposure, when the moose, instead of entering town, leaves town. Oh, I remember the exact place where I was in Iowa. I remember exactly how I felt watching that show go off the air. Oh, if I were to make a list, a top 10 list of best TV sign-offs, where a show doesn't just get canceled, where it knows it's ending, the final episode of Northern Exposure, the final minutes of Northern Exposure would be on that list for sure. Oh my. Chris Lawmon says, have you read any books published in, say, the last year or two that you have been certain will be a classic and be part of the Western literature canon? Or does a book become a classic only when viewed in hindsight, based on the effect on society and the impact on subsequent writers? I think you're more close to the being on the second part than the first. There's no way that I would make a prediction. Literature is littered with people who made such predictions that were completely wrong. And it's not just what you mentioned here, effect on society and impact on subsequent writers. It's also whether or not a book, for whatever reason, is taught in schools. That's a hugely active factor in whether or not a book becomes a classic. Is it taught in schools as a classic? So I have no idea. I wouldn't put my money on anything that I've seen. Sagnik Dutta says, number one, what are your thoughts on Rabindranath Tagore? Do you like his short stories? I do. There was a big volume, I think from the Belknap Press of Harvard University Press, about 10 years ago. I think it was called The Essential Tagore, and I loved it. I don't know why I got rid of it. I don't have it. I checked, and I don't. I loved it. I loved that volume. But yeah, I think he's really good. How familiar are you with Bengali literature? In the same vein, who are your favorites among Bengali authors who write in English? I'm not knowledgeable enough to start ranking people. And number three, have you seen the Netflix series based on Vikram Chandra's Sacred Games? No, I haven't. Every time I make a mental decision to watch Netflix or Prime Video at night, I tell myself all day, all right, well, you're writing and you're reading, fine, but you're gonna put aside 2 hours to watch stuff tonight. Because you're paying for these subscription services. You're not paying much, but you're paying something. And there's all sorts of creativity involved. And I just don't do it. It comes time to do it, and I just read instead. I need to change that. I really do. BAAZZY says, number 1, have you read The Doll by Boleslaw Proust? No, I don't think so. Number 2, have you read anything by Bruno Schulz? Yes. Yeah, I read, what is it? His famous ones. The Street of the Crocodile. I'm forgetting the names of them in English. There are 2, Heart of a Dog and Street of a Crocodile, or The Sign of a Crocodile, or something like that. 2 slim, famous things that were in a Orange Spine Penguin paperbacks a million years ago, and I read them there. Number 3, thoughts on Joan Didion's novel Play It As It Lays. I like it. And number 4, least favorite Victorian novel. I don't have a least favorite Victorian novel. Number 5, favorite book by Emile Zola. I don't have a favorite book by Zola either. He's never done anything for me. I don't hate him, but I don't have any favorites. Trip says, this question is inspired by the late news about the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In your opinion, has the American experiment failed? Somehow, a single party, the Republican Party, has been able to control nearly all levers of government despite being less popular overall. I don't think that it's fair to say that the American experiment has failed, because hundreds of millions of people benefited from that experiment and are continuing to benefit from that experiment. Hundreds of millions of people are free, freer than they would have been, happier than they would have been, more prosperous than they would have been. So I don't think it's quite accurate to say that the American experiment has failed, but it is. I know that there are going to be quite a few who are going to say here that I'm being alarmist, and we don't have to dwell on it. I don't think it's fair to say that the American experiment has failed, but it is 100% accurate to say the American experiment has ended. The reality of that contention will become much clearer over the course of the next 10 years. But it's nevertheless true. And if you look back at history, if you want to talk about the Florentine experiment, the Athenian experiment, the Dutch Republic experiment, the Venetian experiment, if you want to look back at periods where a large number of people have benefited and prospered and been freer and happier, when you look back at those times and you look at the period when that experiment ends, the end is always very discrete. In this case, it was June 20th, 2020. When you look at when that experiment ends, the next few years are very, very dangerous. They're very dangerous years, which is why I say to people that I know and to all of you, without any hyperbole at all, I am not being ironic. If you have the means to leave this country, you should do so immediately, before the end of the year. Immediately, you should. You can always come back if I'm wrong, right? Anyway, let's see here. Sunu says, what are your opinions about Raymond Carver? He's grotesquely overrated. DJC Silva says, number 1, your Zoom chats are very interesting. Why, thank you. I love them. Is there any chance of you doing chats with Sean D. Stanfast? Oh, wouldn't that be great? I'll have to ask him. Let's see here. Britta Bowler. If Britta's free, I would love to do that. Absolutely love to do it. Oh, and of course, Deb. My Deb. Oh, God. Don't get me started on my Deb. Okay. The reason I call her my Deb is because Mark Richardson also has a Deb, but he has Deb 3.0 or something like that. His Deb is a much newer model than mine. And my Deb is currently ensconced in the woods of Maine with Maine-style Wi-Fi, which is beavers hitting rocks against each other. So I don't think my Deb has the Wi-Fi to do a Zoom chat right now. Maybe that will change. I'm hoping so, because a Zoom chat with her, oh my God, you people would never shut up about it. You like her more than you like me. so I definitely want to do that. Let's see here. DJC Silva also asks, you mentioned recently a writer who stated that she didn't want white people to read her book. No, she. It was Brandon Taylor, the author of Real Life. If he's willing to say that out loud in an interview, then it should stick with him. We should call him by name. It's Brandon Taylor who said, I didn't write my book for the white gaze. And that the only reason that he was able to say that and keep his career instead of immediately being ostracized by society is because in the 21st century, blue-checked progressive socialists have made it socially acceptable for to right a wrong with another wrong. That's the only reason that Brandon Taylor still has a career as a writer or as anything in a civilized society. If Brandon Taylor had said in that same interview, I didn't write my book for Koreans, he wouldn't have a career. He picked the one group that right now in the 21st century you can make a blatantly racist statement about and have it called progressive. But let's not say he, she, or anything like that. I know you probably just didn't know his name, but let's be sure we know his name, regardless of what you think of his opinions. The person who said he didn't want white people to read his books was Brandon Taylor, the author of Real Life. It doesn't disturb me, but I am curious if this is a growing trend in the USA. Well, it should disturb you, because it is a growing trend. Absolutely, and not just in the USA. It is a growing trend across the board in so-called enlightened West, and needs to be rooted out. It needs to be vigorously opposed, or it will win. People always think some variation of it doesn't disturb me, or it's not my concern, or it's not being done to me, so I can ignore it. You absolutely cannot ignore it. If there is someone on your school board who is a racist, no matter who they're a racist about, you should organize to get them off your school board, off your city council, off your state government. No matter who they're racist against. Because these people find each other and they grow. So, like mold. If you turn away a benevolent blind eye, when you turn it back, they'll all be there. Anyway, this is turning out to be quite ranty, isn't it? Let's move on. Charles Russell says, just finished reading all of Dostoevsky's major works, and as you know, Chernyshevsky's What Is to Be Done is alluded to time and again throughout his bibliography. I know it's probably a load of rubbish, but from what I can gather, it might be influential enough to warrant a read-through. Do you think it's worth picking up? No, it isn't. And the only reason anyone has ever done that, the course of events that you described, read all of Dostoevsky and then pick up What Is to Be Done. The only reason anyone has ever, first of all, no woman has ever done that. Only men do that. And the only reason a man has ever done that is to talk about it at a party, which is a bad reason to do anything. So I would say no, you don't need to bother. View from the Bar, oh God. He's wordy. View from the Bar. He goes on at great length. Probably, oh God. Yeah, he has, okay. All right. We're going to spend a few thousand words with View from a Bar. Number one, have you ever come across a book so strange or so enchanting or maybe so insidious that you were compelled to read it several times in relatively quick succession? If so, what are they and what were their elusive or captivating qualities? Every once in a while, I will never go back and start a book over again immediately. But I always reread books in relatively quick succession because I read them first in review copy for impressions, for feelings, and then critically when I get the finished copy. The most recent example of this is something I think I've mentioned to you, which is Inside Story by Martin Amis, an author I don't particularly like. I can't get Inside Story out of my head. So when I get the finished copy, I will scrutinize it. And that is, I don't know if it's strange or enchanting or insidious or maybe all of the above. I don't know why that book is having the effect on me that it is. But then he goes on. Someone on the TLS podcast, which you might enjoy, was recently defending a long piece she wrote about how she hopes that John Updike's short stories are rediscovered, quote, when this period we're in is over. She said this during a roundtable discussion and was met by a heavy silence. Then she said, I think we all know what I'm talking about when I say this period we're in. Do you think there'll be a time, maybe 2 or 3 decades from now, where the once canceled are dug up and resuscitated, like a chic act of rebellion by Gen Z's children? What this person was referring to, this period that we're in, is a period dominated by moral censors who we have given the power to scare whole companies and to cancel individuals. That's what she's referring to. And she's fearful even of coming that close to calling them by name, otherwise she would get canceled. And this is all stuff that we have allowed to happen. Instead of ostracizing these people, instead of making them unemployable, instead of imprisoning them, or whatever other fates Soviet censors deserved, instead we have empowered them. The unspoken implication is that they are more enlightened than the rest of us. So if they call out somebody, well, then we should sheepishly fall in line. When the act of calling out is evil, and it doesn't matter who the target is. So, and the point I was trying to make, since these questions are connected, is that if you don't root out those people actively now, if you don't root them out now, whether they're bothering you or not, then when it comes time in 20 or 30 years with Gen Z's children, all that will be is those people. That won't be anything left. They have to be rooted out, embarrassed, and ostracized now, or they're not going anywhere. Then he goes on, I always confuse Lee J. Cobb and George C. Scott, but I know my favorite is Cobb. Which do you prefer? Are you insane? Are you absolutely insane? A vaudeville hack versus George C. Scott? What is the... What? We're going to have a long chat about movies and your lack of taste therein. Okay, bub? In the way that everyone says George C. Scott was born for the role of Patton, what's your favorite example of an actor inhabiting a role where it really felt like the casting could not have been better? I feel the same way about Dudley Moore in Arthur. For me, I think the quintessential example will always be Leo McKern as Rumpole of the Bailey. I was horrified when it was announced 20 years ago that Albert Finney was in talks to play Rumpole in a big screen movie, or maybe even a BBC series. I was so happy that never happened. As far as I'm concerned, Leo McKern as Rumpole of the Bailey. Although it's also easy to say, as long as we're on TV, it's easy to say Jeremy Brett as Sherlock Holmes and Joan Hickson as Miss Marple. Joan Hickson as Miss Marple is... there's quite a few. Let's see here. What do you think of Sinatra's acting? It stinks, just like everything else he did. If you could be a guest editor with full reign for an issue at any periodical, which would you choose? I want the whole of it, not just one issue. Justin Raymond says, what's the best translation of the Aeneid in your opinion? Is it Fitzgerald? No, I would say Alan Mandelbaum. As long as we're not talking Dryden, and I assume we're not talking Dryden. Jessica wants to know, are you working on any new fiction writing? Oh, Jessica, it's Preptober. I ought to be working on new fiction. I'm going to make a video about Preptober. I'm going to get on the ball about fiction. I am. Taking Tea with Catherine says, if the doctor showed up and offered you a round trip in the TARDIS, where and when would you like to go today? And which doctor do you envision? Well, which doctor has recently undergone a seismic shift? Because I've recently realized, replaying it all in my head, that my favorite performance as the Doctor may be Peter Capaldi. And that's after decades of saying that my Doctor is Tom Baker, the fourth Doctor. And that may still be true, but Capaldi's performance as the Doctor, I think, is worth study. It's an amazing turn as a favorite character. But I wouldn't take a trip on the TARDIS to any time in Earth's past. I'd be happy to go somewhere else. But I wouldn't. I'm perfectly happy with the past and the present being just what they are. The Doctor wants to take me somewhere else. Fine, absolutely. Joseph Green says, number one, Blackadder or Monty Python? Monty Python. Believe it or not, you'd think Blackadder, but no, it's Monty Python. Number two, can you remember any long novels or series that follow a character through several decades? I'm thinking of something like the Rabbit books by Updike. And yes, I forgive you your thoughts on Updike as a novelist. He stinks, and eventually you will realize that. But didn't all of his compatriots do that? Didn't they all follow characters through decades as if we were the least bit interested? Nothing's coming to mind, no. And number three, are there any advantages to pursuing an MFA in creative writing? I'm finishing a BA in English, and I think I hate reading now. Well, BA in English would make you hate reading. There's only one advantage to getting an MFA in writing, and that is that more and more places where you might be hired to teach writing require that you have one. That's all. You don't learn anything about writing in an MFA program. You don't learn anything about criticism or critical thinking in an MFA program. Anything of those kinds of practical matters that you would learn in an MFA program, you can learn by talking to me on this channel for 5 videos in a row. Instead of paying $30,000 or $100,000, whatever MFA programs cost these days. There is no, in other words, artistic or professional reason to get an MFA. And believe me, I know whereof I speak. But there is nevertheless an incredible practical reason to get one, and that is that a lot of places ask for it. They require it more and more, especially as MFA as a degree becomes more and more common. And down the line, you might want to teach creative writing. It's not that bad a gig if you can get it, to teach English and creative writing at a really good high school or freshman entry level in college or at an academy somewhere. So I don't know, if you have the time, the patience, and the money, you might want to just tough it out and get an MFA. Maybe fast track it. Especially fast tracking it might be possible to do depending on the program. If you have a big work in progress that you can just rely on, lean on during your time there. So feel free to email me, and we can discuss what you should do. But the other part of your question, yeah, I hate reading now. Academic studies of English often kill that. If you watch Sean the Bookmaniac, for instance, on his channel, he will, and you should, of course, watch Sean's channel, but he will occasionally mention there's no other word for it, the trauma that was done to his reading life by studying at school, by studying at the graduate level. It has that effect. It doesn't produce readers, people who love reading, and it crushes the people who do. It produces pedants. MFA, yes, only if you have the money, you have the time, and you have the ability to stomach it. Aaron Donnelly says, number one, what are your thoughts on the idea of being well-read? It's a vexed subject. I get this a lot from people because there are two sides to it. One is people often conflate inaccurately being well-read and being widely read. You can be well-read in the American Western, in science fiction, in physics, without being widely read in terms of the literary canon, in terms of literary traditions and the past of other countries, traditions of other cultures. That is being widely read, and it has its benefits. Being well-read just means don't dig into a hole, don't be an ostrich with its head in the sand. If you read, I don't even know, if you read German literary fiction, and that's all you're interested in, well, then find out the German literary figures that the people you read liked, and read them, and then read the ones they liked, and so on. That will at least get you well read in your subject. Number two, do you believe that these times can best be compared to the end of the Roman Republic? Are we in a Marius and Sulla moment, or a Caesar crossing the Rubicon moment? I mentioned that in these questions already. The problem with people who make these comparisons of crossing the Rubicon, Marius and Sulla, the end of the Roman Republic, the end of the Roman experiment, the problem with people who do this is that they don't take their own analogy seriously. And that gets a little irritating for me. Not your question, but the idea gets a little irritating for me when people say, yeah, I tell you, the American experiment is over. We have crossed the Rubicon. But they stay. They stay in America. So they'll tell me in the same breath that they're saying, yeah, that all that is true. They will then say, in the same breath, well, yeah, I have, Roman citizenship. I have dual citizenship with Italy. And there are times when I actually think about going and living there. I try to be restrained, but I want to tell those people, list your objections to leaving. Well, I don't know. My parents are kind of old. They might not like it. I really like my local drugstore. I'm thinking about going to grad school. Take those objections and go back to Berlin in 1933. And picture that you're sitting in a room across from a 22-year-old Jewish man who is giving you those reasons, those same reasons. My parents might not like it. I'm thinking about getting a degree. There are some places around here that I like. Giving you those same reasons for why he's not going to leave Berlin right now when he can. Imagine how you would feel if you heard those excuses from that young man, knowing what you know about what his future is. You would want to grab him by the throat and say, pack a bag and leave right now. Leave right now. So when people say, are we at a Marius and Sulla moment? Have we crossed the Rubicon? I have stopped saying yes, because all I'm going to hear in response is a kind of diffident smile, a diffident laughter. Yeah, I know, it's really bad. Okay. All right. The answer to your question is yes. I do believe that those comparisons are accurate. And if, for instance, I sometimes watch the YouTuber David Pakman. It's a political commentator from Boston. And he comments on the change in American society 5 times every day on his channel. Just hit 1 million subscribers. So, in other words, he knows everything about it. He knows all the details about it that anyone needs to know. And he has dual citizenship with Venezuela, I think. He could go and live there as a citizen. 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months, access to their health care, access to everything. Just be a citizen there. And he's not doing it. He's not doing it. He's done a couple of episodes where he just sort of idly muses about doing it. I know people who have UK citizenship, dual citizenship with the UK, dual citizenship with Israel. They don't go. They're still here. Anyway. Oh, no, we're out of time. Here, I'm going to stop there, and I'll be back.